Hello everyone, my name is Vinay Rajdev and I'm a geography PhD student at the University of Calgary. And my supervisors are Dr. Craig Gerlach and Dr. Shelley Alexander. My doctoral research focuses on assessing the Kluane First Nation food system in southwest Yukon and develop food system strategies to improve food security and enhance community self-reliance. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on the framework of the food system and what my project is about. I haven't collected any data yet, hence I don't have results to present. To be food secure, individuals and households must at all times have reliable access to sufficient and safe nutritious food, and it must be of acceptable quality to have an active and healthy life. Additionally, in northern indigenous communities where they rely on country food, to be food secure, they must have the continued and predictable availability and access to food derived from northern environment through indigenous cultural practices, such as hunting, trapping, fishing, and harvesting plants. However, food security is underpinned by food system, which include a range of activities that comprises dynamic interaction between and within biophysical and human environment, which result in the production, processing, distribution, preparation, consumption, and disposing of food. In northern Canada, Indigenous communities rely on mixed food systems that include country foods, that is, food from the land obtained through traditional means such as hunting, fishing, and trapping, as shown on the left side of the screen. Store-bought food or market-based food, that is, food from grocery store as shown on the center of the screen, and locally produced food as shown on the right side of the screen. The integrity and viability of food system in Canada's north is challenged by a range of climatic, social, and ecological stressors that in combination are contributing to the rise of food insecurity across the north, affecting both rural indigenous communities and larger urban centers in different ways. Access to market food is challenging because of high transportation costs, especially when the closest full-service grocery store is 3 hours drive from a community. For instance, the Kluane First Nation community members have to drive 3 hours to Whitehorse from Burwash Landing to purchase food at a grocery store. Also, the generally high cost of food purchased in a store in rural and isolated communities limits food accessibility, as the high cost of fresh food is often too prohibitive. Developing a sustainable food system is a priority for the Kluane First Nation, as food security is an increasing concern. A sustainable food system is a collaborative network that integrates several components in order to enhance a community environmental, economic, and social well-being. It is built on principles that further the ecological, social, and economic values of a community and region. In 2014, the Kluane First Nation collaborated with the Arctic Institute of Community-Based Research to develop a food security strategy and action plan to improve food security for the Kluane First Nation citizens. However, the basic for designing and evaluating food security strategies rests on a solid food system assessment within the foodshed. To date, there has been very little research attention on the community food system in the Kluane First Nation, and I hope my research addresses these knowledge gaps. Therefore, my research objectives are to understand the current trends in food system, including country food, locally produced food, and market-based food within the Kluane Region Foodshed. And what I mean by food shed, it is a social geographic space that produces or provides food for a particular population. And when you think about the food shed, uh, think about the what the watershed is, where you have all the rivers and tributaries within the boundary of watershed. And food shed is very similar to what the watershed is like, where all the food are produced or provided within the area for a certain population. The second objective is to provide a framework for understanding and analyzing the food system, along with a couple energy and water systems in the Kluane region and for Kluane First Nation. The short and long-term goals are to improve food and environmental security. And I will get into the details about the energy and water systems in a moment. The third objective is to protect Kluane First Nation country food harvest, access and availability, and to enhance food security and community self-reliance through the development of new food production strategies within the community of Burwash Landing and Distraction Bay in Yukon Territory. The fourth objective is to develop a business plan to implement local food system strategies to promote Kluane First Nations local food production, food security, sovereignty, health, and well-being. And lastly, to provide education and training to Kluane First Nation youth and to build capacity infrastructure and local and regional food production in Kluane First Nations communities. And so this whole area here is the southwest Yukon, and the communities I'm going to be working with is Burwash Landing and Distraction Bay, and they're bordering the Kluane National Parks and Reserves. Burwash Landing has a community population of 72, and Distraction Bay has a population of 55. They are located on the west shore of Kluane Lake, and they're about 276 kilometers and 260 kilometers west of the Whitehorse, respectively. Both communities are home to the Southern Tutchone people of the Kluane First Nation, and it is within the traditional territories as highlighted in the orange. Burwash Landing was used as a summer camp until the trading post was established in early 1900s. Since then, the Kluane First Nation began to live a less nomadic life, and Burwash Landing became an administrative center for the Kluane First Nation when the Alaska Highway was built in the 1940s. Distraction Bay was established as a center for constructing and maintaining the Alaska Highway. Today, it is largely a government services community and houses the Kluane Lake School. Kluane First Nation is one of the 11 self-governing First Nation in Yukon. The Kluane First Nation signed the land claim and self-governing agreements in 2003, and it came into effect in February 2004. This is another map showing all the traditional territories of all the Yukon First Nations, and the Kluane First Nation is highlighted in this yellow-green, and it overlaps with the White River First Nations. In northern Canada, the three food systems serve a different segment of population. Indigenous people rely heavily on the country food system, while the non-Indigenous people place their greater value and dependency on the locally grown food system. However, this trend is increasing for the Indigenous people in northern Canada. On the other hand, most communities in northern Canada also depend heavily on the market-based food system, which mimics the food system, the industrial food system. So food system in general is the path that food travels from the field to fork. It includes the growing, harvesting, processing, packaging, transporting, and marketing, consuming, and disposing of food. Since the 1940s, 1950s, store-bought food from the southern region have played an increasing role in the diet of the indigenous people at the expense of country foods. These store-bought food are readily available, however, they are both expensive and generally poor in nutritional quality. As a result, indigenous people are experiencing a host of diet-related health problems, including but not limited to colorectal cancer, obesity, and diabetes. In most remote and isolated communities in northern Canada, food supplies are either brought in by ships or flown in by air. However, for indigenous communities connected by road, some of the community members have to travel for hours to the nearest grocery store to buy food. The current market-based food system in northern Canada are dominated by small numbers of large corporations that import food from the south. Only certain kinds of food are imported and stocked, and they are based on market demands. Hence, there are high supplies of nutrition poor, high sugar, and fatty food than highly priced, low quality, fresh fruit and vegetables. Household units in indigenous communities are primarily a primary unit of the country food system, which is defined as all food accepted within a particular culture that is available for local resources such as hunting or fishing. The production, processing, distribution, consumption, and handling of food and food waste in country foods is significantly different from the market-based food. Wildlife is hunted by community members on daily, weekly, monthly, or seasonal basis with the hunting equipment. Most of the time, hunting occurs within close proximity to communities or highways. In the case of Alaska Highway within the Kluane region in Yukon territories. Some hunters from Kluane First Nation don't travel far off the highway, and all hunting and fishing were done in areas close to the highway. However, depending on the time of the year, harvesting may occur contingent on time traveling to the hunting area, the type of species hunted, and the level of skills of the hunters. The diagram shows how the country food is traveling from the land to the community. Government regulation at all levels, that is, indigenous self-governments, territorial, and federal, can also affect hunting behavior on what animals community members can hunt, how many, and at what time of the year. In Yukon territories, some of the most common regulated hunts include moose and caribou, where regulations are variable depending on the status of the animal population. Climate change and seasonal variability in weather patterns have a significant impact on country food system in northern Canada, and they have been identified by some of the Yukon First Nation as key research areas that need to be systematically studied. Over recent decades, parts of northern Canada have experienced an increase of temperature that is roughly 4 to 5 times greater than the global average temperatures. As a result, there has been escalating permafrost thawing, increased intensity and frequency of wildfires, changing wildlife migration, diminishing water availability. These changes have an impact not only on people but also on the health and distribution of wildlife and culturally preferred country foods. In addition, these conditions compromise travel safety, making subsistence harvesting increasingly difficult for indigenous communities. Facing challenges of market-based food system and country food system, as discussed previously, some of the indigenous communities in northern Canada are turning to local food production, such as greenhouses and community gardens, as an alternative to address some of the food insecurity. In general, the emphasis on developing local food system is expanding across North America as consumers are aiming for closer connection with food and to reduce environmental footprints. The net cost of procuring food from the land, that is hunting, fishing, and trapping, and from the store are generally expensive, and the adoption of sustainable agriculture such as community garden, greenhouses, and farming are slowly emerging to produce food to support many communities in northern Canada. This allows communities to exercise their food sovereignty by gaining more control over their food systems. In this diagram, we have the local food production such as the greenhouse, community garden, small-scale farming and livestock, such as these in the photos in Yukon, and vertical farming, such as the crop box, using the hydroponic system to grow food in a 40-foot shipping containers. These locally produced food are harvested and stored in either community refrigerators or root cellars. The locally produced foods serve these communities, and some food are integrated with country food. Food waste are then decomposed and brought back to the farmland as fertilizer. For Kluane First Nation communities, one of my goals is to develop a business plan to implement local food system strategies to improve food security and community self-reliance. Indigenous people in the North can improve their local and regional food security by rebuilding their food systems. As mentioned earlier, developing a sustainable food system is a priority for Kluane First Nation, which will require more integrated and holistic approaches to maintaining their food resources and prioritizing community-led initiative and self-determination. A sustainable food system is a collaborative network that integrates several components in order to enhance a community environmental, economic, and social well-being. It is built on principles that further the ecological, social, and economic values of a community and region. To understand the integrated food system, I will be utilizing the Community Capital Framework to describe the food system within the Kluane Region Foodshed and with the Kluane First Nation. Community Capital Framework was developed by Cornelia and Jan Flora and was used by Andrew Spring and his research team to analyze food system in the community of Kaskiskia in Northwest Territories by focusing on the 7 types of capital as you see on the diagram here. For more details on each capital, I would encourage you to read Andrew Spring's paper titled Climate Change, Community Capital, and Food Security: Building a More Sustainable Food System in the Northern Canadian Boreal Community. Community Capital Framework provides a starting point as it identifies what community has instead of what they need or lack, and highlights how they can multiply their resources capital through investment. Each community has its own resources that it can use to negotiate its own development and well-being. These resources can either be consumed, stored, or preserved, or can be invested to create new or more resources for short, mid, and long term. Overall, Community Capital Framework offers a method of analyzing inputs and impacts within the community to determine the success of sustainable livelihood activities. Community Capital Framework also highlights the independence, interaction, and synergies among the capitals, and use of the asset in one capital can have a positive or negative effect over the quantity and possibility of other capitals. Additionally, the relationship between food, energy, water are analyzed to understand complex interaction among multiple resource systems. These relationships require a system-based framework that explicitly recognizes water, energy, and food systems as both interconnected and interdependent. These, this approach aims to maximize synergies and minimize trade-offs, thereby improving the efficiency of resource use and internalizing and mitigating rather than externalizing social and environmental impacts. The outcome of this approach is to improve food, energy, water, culture, and environmental security. Studies typically focus on sectored food, energy, and water system components, but to date, very little attention has been given to understanding the crucial interconnection of these three factors in indigenous communities. An example of a relationship between food and energy is a hunter needs fuel for their skidoos or ATV or trucks to travel to the hunting area to hunt for food. Fuel is expensive in northern Canada and has a financial impact on hunters to travel to get access to country food. An example between food and water is the rising temperature has an impact on sea ice condition in the Arctic region or lakes in the subarctic region, which then have an impact on marine mammals or fish, which can potentially impact the quality of country food. So understanding the food system does not only involve understanding what resources community has to sustain a food system, but it also involves understanding the interconnection between energy system and water systems. So, what is next for me? Well, I have already consulted with the Kluane First Nation on this project, and we have narrowed the project scope and refined research objectives in a way that reflected community's interests. I presented this project to the Dan-KE Renewable Resources Council to get their perspective, and my next step is to present this project to the Kluane First Nation Chief and Council and get their perspectives on this project before we discuss the research agreements. I will start my fieldwork in 2020, and I will conduct a community food system assessment and a dietary recall. A community food assessment is a participatory and collaborative process that explores a broad range of issues related to food to inform action to improve the food systems and community food security. To date, there is no specific community food system assessment tools designed for First Nation communities in northern Canada. However, one tool I will adapt to this project is a community-led food assessment tool for Inuit communities developed by Food First Newfoundland and Labrador and in collaboration with Dr. Chris Virgo at Trent University and Christine McTavish, who now works at the Nunatsiavut government. I was involved in the early stage of the development of the food assessment tools. The tool will provide communities with the knowledge and resources needed to train community members about how to effectively conduct and evaluate a community food assessment. The goal of the tool is to help make a positive change for communities and to improve access to food by identifying local strengths and opportunities associated embedded in the food system. Interviews will be conducted with community members in Burwash Landing and Destruction Bay, and also community representatives and organization will be interviewed. The Arctic Institute of Community-Based Research, a not-for-profit organization based in Whitehorse, will be collaborating with us on this project, and they will be training the Kluane First Nation youth to do interviews and mapping. These youth were involved in the Kluane First Nation Food Security Project, which was conducted in 2014. Semi-structured interviews and focus group, along with mapping, will be conducted to gather information on integrated food system, areas of seasonal food sources, including country food, local food, and market-based food, the transportation network, water resources and water sources, energy infrastructure and resources will be discussed. Also, experiences with wildlife, hunting, fishing, trapping, and berry harvesting, growing food locally and traveling to grocery store to purchase food, knowledge of regional weather variability and climate change, and other issues surrounding food system will be discussed during interviews. Discussion on food system strategies will be highlighted for country food, locally produced food, and market-based food. Mapping will provide a visual representation of these systems, both spatially and temporally. A large map will be printed and used for mapping during interviews. I will use a 7-day dietary recall to quantify food intake by Kluane First Nations citizens and non-citizens in Burwash Landing and Destruction Bay. The 7-day dietary recall questionnaires will be asked about all food and beverages, that's including the country food, locally produced food, and market-based food, consumed the week before, and the quantities of each, using our hands to reference a portion size for each food consumed. Other information to obtain include food sources, food processing method, food preparation method, and any additions. The questionnaires will be conducted for each season for 1 year, which will provide a temporal variation of food intake and what portion of the food is coming from which components of the food system. For statistical analysis, the mean, the median, daily intake of food, and the significant difference for food and energy intake between season, age, and gender will be calculated. Interview data, including mapping data and a dietary recall, will provide us an overall understanding of the food system within the Kluane Region Foodshed. With these results, we will then able to develop a business plan to implement food system strategies to improve food security for all and promote community self-reliance. So, in summary, the project will study the current trends in the food system within the Kluane Region Foodshed. In addition, the project provides a framework for analyzing the food system and the interconnected water and energy system in the context of the social and ecological system. The purpose is to provide short and long-term goals to improve food security and community well-being in Kluane First Nation communities. The design, implementation, and evaluation of food security strategies require a solid food system assessment, and to date there has been very little research on this. For this project, I will conduct a food system assessment and then propose a food system strategies to improve Kluane First Nation food security. In collaboration with the Land Resources and Heritage at the Kluane First Nation and the Kluane Community Development Corporation, we will also hope to contribute the development of a business plan that incorporates elements of the food, farm, and energy systems in a way that promotes Kluane First Nation food security, sovereignty, health, and well-being. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the Northern Scientific Training Program, Queen Elizabeth II Graduate Scholarship on Profiling Alberta Graduate Student Scholarship. Also, I greatly appreciate all my colleagues at the Arctic Institute of North America, and especially Dr. Maribeth Murray, the Executive Director, for providing all the support and guiding me through my PhD. If you have any questions about this project, please send me an email as shown on the slide, and it is vrajdev@ucalgary.ca. Thank you for listening to my talk.